Well, let's move on a little bit closer to home, and we're going to go back to Jackson, Mississippi. Um, where this crisis is still ongoing. I mean, before we get to the Lumumba speech, Matt, do you have that image of the truck? Um,
I have actually better than the image
oh,
of the
you got
truck. I
you
have
got
the
some footage.
TikTok.
Just put this up for a second because this is one of those things that's important to remember. We don't all live in the same society. A lot of us are much more affected than these things than others, and I think this video really highlights this. So again, wait, just really quick, sorry, before we even go any further, in case you haven't seen, in Jackson, Mississippi, there has been a water crisis where people aren't able
Sorry.
to get any.
Oh, I was trying to stop that from happening.
Okay. Um, any clean water in the city. This is a process that has been going on. The crisis is something that happened recently, but it has been sort of boiling over for a very long time. In fact, Jackson was on a boil water notice before this kind of critical failure in their water system. And as listeners of Left Reckoning know, they had a very similar shutdown of the system back in 2021 as well, right? These things are not sort of isolated and just like, oh, accident of history, accident of nature. This happened. Like, no, these are human made problems. And we'll get it. We already talked about many of the reasons why. So if people are watching this for the first time, there's another video that you can watch called Can't Drink the Water. You can watch for more analysis of this, but we want to talk about a little bit of the fallout here. Anyway, sorry, long winded, but yeah, watch this for a second because this is pretty striking.
And we'll just kind of roll through it there, but I'll just read the text. This is in front of Mississippi Governor Tate Reeves' mansion in Mississippi. It's his own personal water truck. Meanwhile, Jackson does not have water to drink, cook, bathe, or flush their toilets. There's the governor's mansion right there. Ooh, nice little gazebo.
So when the residents of Jackson are having to make decisions about how much water they can allocate to flushing their toilet or for cooking food or drinking, this boy's getting water delivered to him by the truckload, which is a big reminder of the class society that we live in. But I know you have this clip of Lumumba, and I think that sort of sets us up well to start talking about this a little bit more.
Yeah, this is cited in an article by the Mississippi Free Press about the Tate Reeves comments on privatization, and it's basically Lumumba describing the types of, I guess you'd call it, public-private partnerships that he's willing to accept with regards to maintenance for the system. And we'll play it now, but it really underlines just the paralysis of to act in a capacity that is needed by like just local city governments, right? Like there's the options for the mayor here aren't great. But anyway, here's what he had to say.
What we are willing to do is the potential of a maintenance agreement, an agreement that helps augment staffing, helps augment the regular O&M that has to happen right here at the water treatment facilities. We're open to that, right? To the end of looking at our staffing shortages. Because we have such a multitude of challenges, it further amplifies the staff shortage. The fact that you don't have people that could be present for anything that can go out at any particular point in time helps underscore the staff shortages that we have. Now, that is a common thing, unfortunately, and we're not in the position that other water treatment facilities are nationally. We took the EPA's advice and the State Department of Health's advice in getting a part of the Rural Water Association and the mutual aid agreement, which provides between different cities support where they need it. We were eagerly anticipating the arrival of some professionals, some water operating professionals from Orlando, Florida. And when it was on the eve of them coming, they shared that they had their own staffing challenges and that they could no longer come. And so we looked at that as a short-term solution. Hopefully we're able to find somebody in the network, but until that happens, we are going to be tasking out for contractual relationships some of the work that has to happen on a routine basis.
There's so much to get into, but I think that last bit does really highlight something about the water crisis is that it's aggravated by a lot of factors in Jackson, Mississippi that we've talked about, and we're going to talk about a little bit more in a moment. But as Matt, you just experienced, it's not a certain thing in most places in this country that the water that you're going to get. from your public taps is safe.
Yeah, actually, I went down. I took the train to Baltimore for the first time. Visit that city over the weekend, and as I was returning on the train, I noticed that they were under their own boil advisory for, I think, E. coli was. Large parts of the city there. It wasn't part of the city I was in. But I mean, that's the thing, right? Like, and go back to the mayor's speech. When people talk about states' rights, right wing folks talk about, like, oh, different states, different sort of innovative ideas, and will compete towards things. What else would it look like but that? Right? Like, that's what it looks like when every sort of municipality is fending for their own uh, public works. And certain ones are going to fail because, particularly because of structural things to do with how we allocate resources in America. And that's just how, like, it's just, we're talking about staffing shortages to get water to people. Like, how clear is it that we don't have priorities set in this country?
No, I mean that we don't have a functioning society at this point. I mean, like the fact is that obviously it gets worse when you boil in all of these other factors like you have in Jackson, Mississippi. But the water crisis in this country has been a long rolling problem. And there has to be serious federal investment, much more than what has been promised by the Biden administration on this. And not only that, it needs to be directed at the federal level to really be making sure that you're able to get over all of the different peculiarities of different political jurisdictions in this country. If it is like old South stuff that you have to overcome, or hyper privatization like you see out in the West and in the North, right? Like those are factors that exist almost everywhere. There are hurdles to a very, very basic function of a society, which is being able to provide clean and safe drinking water to people. Um, but let's go a little bit closer to this fella Tate Reeves, because I think I wanted to make a few points here. Again, if people want to get a more in depth look at the crisis there, what caused it, what can be done about it, I do suggest you watch last week's episode where we talked about it in depth. But I want to look at Tate Reeves a little bit to show hi- something about him that I think really does highlight a kind of fundamental fact of Southern politics that I think a lot of people, particularly people from outside the South, but also even a lot of Southerners who might not know their history all the way through, might miss as well. But we have this first clip here, and let's get into it a bit.
What went wrong? Why is Jackson, your state capital, in this extraordinary position?
Well, what I would tell you is, and I know that you in the press really want to play the blame game and you really want to focus on pitting different people against one another, and that's certainly your priority. That's fine. What we are focused on is the immediate health and welfare of Jackson residents. It's the reason that we have 600 National Guardsmen that have been activated to hand out bottled water. It's the reason that we have tankers running throughout the city to have so that we can say that we have both potable and non-potable water available to the residents of the city of Jackson.
Oh, you're muted, David.
So you see their like very classic kind of Trumpist play. Oh, I'm going to blame the media for this very clear crisis. I bring this up. I promise it will all make sense in a second. That I remember I made some analysis just personally before I was doing any of this when Trump was first, coming into prominence in politics. I'm saying Southerners are never going to accept as their boy, as their guy, a very clear, like New York socialite, rich fella. And one, that was incorrect analysis. And two, I should have been hitting the books a little bit and remembering some of Southern history, because there is a long history of rich people from the Northeast coming into the South and dominating politics, and most importantly, dominating industry to the detriment of the people as a whole. Um, People probably have heard this story, and if you haven't prepped this Favre story, um, where there has been this huge scandal that has been going on actually for a very long time. But I think because of the water crisis in Jackson, I think more and more people are paying attention to it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's this scandal with Brett Favre and many other people too. It's not just him, um, who were basically, the government was paying out money that was supposed to go to needy folks to sort of line the pockets of people like Favre. This is from the Mississippi Free Press by Ashton Pittman. FBI interviewed Brett Favre in temporary assistance to needy families probe. The FBI has interviewed retired NFL quarterback Brett Favre regarding the Mississippi welfare scandal that saw over $77 million in temporary assistance for needy families fund doled out to fund pet projects and sports celebrities, including Favre himself. NBC News reported Thursday night that Favre's attorney confirmed the FBI's involvement. And what we're getting from Favre is like, oh, I didn't know that they were taking money away from needy people. Basically, for people who don't know what happened, the government of Mississippi was paying people like Favre to like deliver speeches and public appearances to folks are paying him astronomical amounts from those funds instead of giving them to people. It's noted a bit later in the piece that Mississippi has the highest poverty rate of any state in the country, despite that MDHS data shows that the state yearly rejects more than 90% of poor Mississippians who apply for TANF assistance. In the past year, just 2,500 children received temporary assistance for needy families out of approximately 192,000 people who live in poverty. Right. So there's been a very clear pilfering of this kind of public good. And I just want to say at the top that this is one of those things that always infuriates me when you hear Yankee liberals go on about how much money goes to red states. Because the money that you're talking about that goes from your federal taxes to those states is literally stuff like this. It's trying to provide assistance for people, and I totally agree. If your argument is that this is why we need the federal government to be stepping in and making sure that those funds are being utilized and provided
Yeah.
for people, but I have to say that I don't think that that's the point that a lot of those people are making. I bring all of this up, and let's just play this last clip to make a historical point about Southern politics, particularly of the Republican variety, when it comes to these kind of social programs and federal money, and how a lot of the relics of the past history of the South really are at play here. We just played this Reeves clip. He's talking about the water system here, and let's see what he wants to do with the crisis as we have seen their inability to provide water for people.
Second question, if you would be supportive of any privatization efforts of the Jackson water system. You've talked about your concerns about the management from the city.
I'm open to all options. Privatization is on the table. Having a commission that oversees failed water systems, as they have in many states, is on the table. So again, I'm open to ideas. I'm open to conversation. I'm open to discussion. I don't go into those conversations lightly.
Sorry, dude.
It's okay. So there you have it. And again, for people who've been watching our coverage of this, you know that purposefully by Reeves and other members of the Republican Party in Mississippi, they have been waging war on this public good, right? So it's one of those things where you create a crisis through years of underfunding, including holding back federal money to fix these systems, before a big crisis like this happens, to then say, well, we need his daddy market to come in and save the day. Now, I know that seems a bit like, traditional GOP politics. It certainly is a mainstay of their ideology. But I bring all this up from his saying that he would be very willing to bring to entertain privatization schemes for the water system there, to the games that they were playing with Brett Favre under the previous administration in Mississippi. So this is actually an old game in Southern politics. I don't know if you know this term, Matt. Do you know who the Redeemers were in the South?
Nope.
So this is, I think most people know about what Reconstruction was. So after the Civil War, you have this period of time where access to voting is greatly expanded, and you start to see Black people being able to vote, and you see these Republican administrations in states across the South. Oftentimes, this is misremembered as a period that went on for a long period of time. In many states, it lasted only a few years before the Democrats were able to come back into power and take back those states. And those people are called the Redeemers.
redeeming white supremacy, basically.
Certainly, and industry, and capital. But it's
Right.
important to remember as Marxists that like
Mm.
there's a class distinction here with the redeemers. The redeemers were not necessarily all the embodiment of the old defeated planter class. The redeemers like to present themselves as inheritors of this, right? They like to do the kind of lost cause mythology and symbolism, but they actually represented a very different part of Southern class politics, predominantly those of the middle and upper middle class, and industry. And after the Civil War, you have an entire region of the country that is completely decimated by the war. Reconstruction did not go far enough. Reconstruction was a process that was ended very, very quickly with a lot of willingness, by the way, from Congress and even from and from the North, because there was a lot of money to be made in the South, a hell of a lot of money, both from the destruction of the war, and the kind of general economic position of that part of the country, but because the Southern system was so not just reactionary, but backwards, right? It was backwards in the sense that a planner economy is not a very good economic system. We're not even talking like morally, certainly, but even on like the basis of like capitalism, there's a reason the North won. Is the North was a much stronger economic powerhouse than the South, because the political institutions in the South were so dominated by the planter class, they were basically able to stop any kind of serious industrialization in the South. So, okay, post slavery, there is going to be industrialization of the South. Well, who gets to win in that system? The idea of the radical Republicans that would be the freed slaves, which makes a hell of a lot of sense to me, which is why one of the most tragic aspects of American history is that the Civil War, which in my opinion was the second American Revolution, it was like the
Yep.
fulfillment of a lot of these ideas that were fought for at the founding of this country. It's such a shame that it never was able to complete that revolutionary process on the economic and social level. It just meant that that planter class was pushed out. So you have this group of people, Southern industrialists and middle class members, who basically are able to take power. And they had a lot of tension with the old planter class, because the planter class wanted to see their old systems of, aristocracy, of personal privilege restored. And they were agrarian, so they didn't like bigger cities and industrialization and the expansion of railroads. Where the redeemers and that old planter class did find a lot of common cause was in waging war against black people and waging war against poor whites. And even though there was a lot of fighting between those two groups in most circumstances, whenever you started to see political movements that were really trying to capture the spirit and the frustration and the devastation of poor working people, and poor black people in the South, the planter class was right there with them, right? What does this have to do with today? Well, there was a lot of money that was up for grabs in the revitalization process, both private and federal, that was out there. And the Redeemers basically took their position in governments and used that as a spoil system to basically up friends of theirs, people who were close to them, for private gain. Right? These were things that were like absolutely was necessary to industrialize the South. There's no, in my opinion, there's no question about that, but it was done in a very particular manner with the intention of enriching a very particular group of folks. And the way that Southern governments relate to public money has always been in this kind of spoil system where you reward people who are loyal to you, where you take money that is supposed to be used to revitalize and use it to somehow find a way, to deliver it to folks. Like they did that in the 1880s. And you're seeing it right there when they take money from TANF and they're giving it to people like Brett Favre, somebody who certainly doesn't need any kind of public largesse. So it's really important, I think, to understand that people like Reeves are representative, certainly, of the decay that is the modern Republican Party, but are also representative of a very old school Southern political view of politics, where you find ways to take public money, where you create crises so that you can have people come in and overtake and privatize public goods like a water system, right? Um, this is an old playbook in the South, and it is key to understanding, in my opinion, Southern politics over the past 140 years in this country, is that the government, despite all the love of the free market and the love of small government, it's always been a spoil system, right? And it's been that way since the radical Republicans were pushed out of office, and it's that way today. And it's not surprising, going back to what I was saying about Donald Trump, that Trump plays so well there, because he's playing right into that historical game of in the South, right? That historical game where wealthy people are coming in and utilizing Southern political chaos that is created by the political class there, that is created by the owning class there for their own gain. Yeah, they've been. It's a long ass tradition, and I think that it's worthwhile to understand that the racism and the white supremacy that is very much a part of Southern history and Southern politics always had an end game in sight, right? Which was preventing any kind of solidarity from working class people in the South, um, and also finding ways to use the government effectively as a piggy bank to enrich yourself and enrich your friends. And Southern governors know that shit very damn well, and they've been doing it since the 1880s, and they're doing it today. And we need to come up with political movements that can break this impasse that we're currently in, because it's not working for us, and it wasn't working for us in the past either.
Yeah, that post Civil War sort of. I've been reading a lot about Custer, as I always do, George Armstrong Custer, Union cavalry general who, after the war, was pissing off Ulysses Grant. There was some corruption stuff, but also was a fucking like Democrat, basically. Like, thought that, and there are certain parts of Custer as a Union general, brevet general, like the ranks were inflated during the war, but as a guy who did free actual slaves with military force, and also like recognizing, okay, these guys can fight a little bit too. Ultimately, he was supporting President Andrew Johnson and saying we need to get basically these freed black people back under control, back producing. Like there's a whole bunch of like letters of him and his wife talking about how like you just see him standing around, right? Like they should be making things. And there was a big boom for capitalism after the war for like almost
a huge
decade.
boom. It was a
Yeah.
great place to make your money. I mean, I think that, and this is like the dangerous game that the Democrats were able to play, because one, by their own design, right? It's not like, oh, this just happened. They were doing this on purpose to create this crisis.
Yeah.
But the South was economically devastated, and particularly for the people, working people who didn't benefit from the slave system, and certainly formerly enslaved people. It was very easy for kind of for these Southern politicians to say like, oh well, you notice the big thing that's changed here is we've gotten rid of slavery here, and now you're supposed to be of equal standing to somebody who you're able to look down upon. They were able to make a lot of political hay out of that for a long time, and as I try to talk about a lot on this program, there were plenty of moments of resistance and attempts to try to break that situation. But it's really important to understand that post Civil War, the South was a free for all, and a lot of people made a shitload of money. And I think that a lot of people don't have that kind of historical understanding to get that, like the politics that we have today in the South are very much outcomes of that failed project of Reconstruction. Again, a lot of it purposeful and by design. But it is a historical legacy that we're still sitting with today. And like, sorry, like you still see it. Like the South is the poorest area of the country. There's mass disinvestment, and it was purposeful to to prop up a few boys who are able to make a shitload of money, predominantly on the railroads, and then by extracting natural resources from the South to then be manufactured in the Northeast, right? So I want to do a hell of a lot more on this. We did this today just because I was seeing Reeves, and I just could not resist the kind of historical parallels to what he's doing there right now to what a lot of these redeemers did in the South after the Civil War.